Chris wants to record. So we're not going to go live because this message is actually really geared to the ones in this room and the people that are here. We have some guests here today, and I'm really grateful for that, and I really want your input and you to be part of what we're doing, so please do not feel excluded. But we are actually going to be talking about the 2018 vision that was brought back in October. And but before we go into that, I really felt like God wanted me to lay a little bit of a precursor. And so he started working on me back, actually, whenever Dave's retirement party is, I don't remember the date, on a message called Belonging. And it actually stemmed out of a conversation I had with Scott Schrag, Gene's son. I don't know if you remember Scott. Oh, you should all know Scott. Anyway, me and him obviously went to high school together. Neither one of us remember each other. And so we were there talking about, like, did you know this person? Did you do that person? We were talking about our past and some of the not so favorable things that we did and some of the things that we shouldn't have done. And then we brought up our testimonies. And the thing about my testimony is I actually don't share my testimony publicly very often because I never want to dishonor my family. And so it made me start thinking about some of the struggles that I had and the need to belong. And that's what kind of God was birthing here. And I wrote this sermon probably 6 times, and God kept wiping it clean and wiping it clean. And I came, Friday I had nothing besides the word belonging. And so the Roths and I came here on Friday, and we were cleaning, going through the office or some things that Dave left behind for us to utilize. And we've been going through papers, and I came across a stack of old ministry reports. And Eileen said, just throw them away. I have a copy, because these were obviously Dave's copy. But I felt compelled to go home and just take them home. So Friday night, we hosted a prayer meeting at our house, and it was just Chris and I. Nobody came. The weather was terrible. I cannot blame you. So instead, in a prayerful atmosphere, Chris and I read all of these reports.
It took hours.
It did take hours. It took longer than the 2 hours dedicated for prayer. It did. And my boys were not happy because they wanted my attention. However, they didn't get it. So I actually want to share some highlights. I want to take you on a little bit of a journey of some of those things. Okay? So we read about a full Sunday school, multiple classes because there were so many kids, teens in love with Jesus, a singles group, a support group for those that were spouses of people in addiction and abuse. We read about elders and teachers coming and going. We read about weddings and babies being born and dedicated, outreaches, baptisms, prayer meetings, salvation events, all supported and mightily attended, okay? We read about glory days that we hear so much about. In 1988, Agape had 80 kids at VBS. I know, right? In 1991, I want to show it to you. Maybe I should have been wired. In 1991, this very building is illustrated on the cover. And the excitement for it is throughout the pages. They were preparing for it. The last meeting in the foyer was October 20th of 1991. And the first meeting in this building was December 15th of 1991. And for 2 months, the congregation spent together working on this building, doing things like painting and preparing. In 1992, we read about the preparation and anticipation for growth now that this building was finished. In April of 93, we had 141 in attendance that day. And the average that year was 99. In 94, we read about the dedication of the baptistry. And that very afternoon, a small church from Allentown used it. We also read about people. Sharon, Dave's first wife, almost came to life to us through her words. By the time I became really close with Jody, Sharon was very, very sick. And I was not healed from an autoimmune disease, so I didn't spend much time with Sharon. But I've heard all these powerful things about her and what a heart of a woman, and what a wonderful woman she was. And so I got to read her words and see her speak about all the things that were taking place here. Her passion was evident. We read about Peggy and Alan joining. January 12th, 1992. Yep. And quickly, I know.
Good day.
But we saw you through the pages, but we read about your actual joining date. And they quickly became a force in children's ministry and junior church. We read about Vita Keller being Sunday school superintendent and passing her torch to Gloria Kingapple there. We read about a church van, which is like a major dream of Chris and me. Big time. You know, our van, we have a van, but that's not big enough. We read about the beginning of our Easter breakfasts that have since ended. Man, I miss those. I miss those. Those were such a great fellowship time. You know, and I know the Englers could never get here early enough. I mean, there was no question. I'm complaining fault in there. But man, that was awesome. We'd come in and we'd have breakfast together Easter morning, and it just fizzled out.
Yeah, miss all those colored pancakes.
The bacon was always my favorite. We could see our influence in the community in this valley. We did things. We reached people. Every report spoke of new members, baby dedications, baptisms, weddings, and other awesome events. The monthly average income, it was anywhere between $5,000 to $8,500. Now, this is back in the early 90s. Active members were always around the 50s. We read about financial blessing and provision. We read about growth. We read about prosperity. But now, the last report I had was in 95, and something began to shift. We read about division in that report. We read about hurts and wounds. I want to read just a section from it, because you'll see what I mean. I want to read Pastor Dave's words. And for those of you who don't know who Pastor Dave was the founding pastor of Agape New Testament Fellowship. He just retired, was it 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago? But you can hear in his voice that it was a broken time. However, as we went through the year, divisions that had been in our congregation for some time intensified. The church board sought to implement changes that might reconcile the differences. And these changes and attempts by individuals did not resolve the conflicts, and a number of families left the church throughout this year over several different issues. Deep hurts occurred in both those who left and those who stayed. We are currently praying for healing in all of those affected. Those remaining have expressed a desire to continue to have David Farnolds as their full-time paid pastor and are making financial sacrifices to that end. Dave and Sharon are serving full-time and walking in faith for their salary beyond 25 hours a week. God has been faithful in meeting the needs of everyone. In this report, there was a talk of budget cuts. Gloria talked about budget cuts and having to make sacrifices in the Sunday school for that. The tone began to shift. Now, my family, the Englers, you have 3 of my boys, my husband and I, and then the other 2, we had all 5 of them that day, came here in February of 2006. So it's
11 years.
It's not 11
12
years.
years. 12 years.
12 years, yeah. Okay? And the only children here were the young kids. Now, the young kids were Laurel Young's children. She has 4 children. She has 2 twins that are about the same age as Christopher. They're 18. And then she has Tyler and Krista in their 20s. And when we came here, the twins were 6. The Youngs were like 12, 14. Those were the only children here. And I remember them laying on the back of the church. They would just lay back there. Yep.
I remember.
There were only about 20 people here that day, at most. It was a small group. We had no computer. We had no website. We had no outreaches going. It was like a very small little church. From 1995 through 2006, Agape went through a lot. And we could read through the reports, because Eileen has been awesome to keep them all, and see how everything slowly went to that place. But there were multiple splits, financial struggles, a loss of people, and a loss of our influence in the community. And when we came in 2006, none of that prosperity that I just read about remained. Eli, you want to say something?
I got an idea. Maybe we should put out that outside.
Sure.
So like people can read it.
Maybe what we can have Eileen and we can that's a great idea. I don't have all of them, I just have a handful.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Okay, so the question is, why am I taking you on this historical journey, right? And this is the hard part. Because none of that, what I just told you about, belongs to us. Okay? None of those years. See, some lived it. I'm looking around this room, and there's a lot of people that were there for it. Some sowed and some reaped. Others did not. Us, I know the Peraltas were in here. Okay? Like Cheryl, Kim, These are before us. Either way, the past is not where we belong. We belong in the now. What is God doing now? The past, these reports are here for us to learn from. We never want to dismiss our history. It's very important. We learn not to repeat mistakes. We learn to not go around mountains over again. We laughed a lot, like reading about some of the stuff with the Colstocks and the Roths they even mentioned it. They were through all reports. It was cool to see those people and Sharon, who's passed away, to learn about her. But we're not supposed to stay there. See, the blessings that were in those years are not our blessings to relish in. And the mistakes that happened in those years are not our battles to overcome either. God has imparted a vision to the elders that Chris and I gave him back in October, but due to a lot of conflict, it fell on deaf ears. And it became very apparent to us that the vision is not something that we are supposed to present. The vision is something that we're supposed to build with you, to be inspired by the Holy Spirit together. See, when we present you a vision, then it becomes our vision. When we build a vision, it becomes our vision. We can't build something if we don't have vision for it. We talked about the new wine and a new season. We need vision. I want to read Proverbs 29:18, and I'm actually reading from the Message Bible, something I usually don't do. But I love the way it's worded. Just let this resonate with you, okay? If people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what God reveals, they are most blessed.
Amen.
Okay? The Roths and Englers read a book a couple months ago. A couple people through the transition asked, why are we doing this now? What was the reason? Why is this all of a sudden coming to a head? And I know for the Englers and the Roth, this book was very bitter book to read. It's called The Autopsy of a Deceased Church. And if anybody would like to borrow it, you could read it in a day. And I want to read you the symptoms. Okay? So the first symptom is slow erosion. Often the decline is in the physical facilities, but it is much more than that. The decline is in the vibrant ministries that once existed. The decline is in the prayer lives of the members who remain. The decline is in the outward focus of the church. The decline is in the connection with the community. The decline is in the hopes and dreams of those who remain. Decline is everywhere in the church, but many don't see it. Another symptom, the past is the hero. The most pervasive and common thread of our autopsies was that the deceased churches lived a long time with the past as a hero. They held on more tightly with each progressive year. They often clung to things of the past with desperation and fear. And when any internal or external force tried to change the past, they responded with anger and resolution. We will die before we change. And they did. The church refused to look like the community. The community began to change, and in some cases, the change was ethics or racial. In other cases, it was age-related, and sometimes simply economic change. People in the community did not feel welcomed in the church, and those in church were more concerned about protecting the way they did church than reaching residents in the community. The very thought of making significant changes to reach and impact the community is frightening. To suggest that the church members begin to transition leadership to residents in the community seems absurd. It is our fortress, they say. Outsiders not welcome. We will fight to keep the church just as it is until we die. And that day is not very far off. Next, the budget moved inwardly. But in the dying churches, the staff is expected to almost exclusively be on call for church members. That means staff members aren't reaching out to others beyond the church. That means they aren't involved in the community in an incarnational sense. That means they are mostly hired hands for the church. Likewise, building facility costs are reduced only as a last resort. In dying churches, the last expenditures to be reduced are those that keep the members comfortable. The Great Commission becomes the Great Omission. Our autopsy relieved a lot of nostalgia about the growth of the church. There was a lot of remember when about particular years of growing numbers and high attendance days. However, members of dead or dying churches often overlook the reason behind those years of growth and expansion. Thriving churches have the Great Commission as their centerpiece of their vision, while dying churches have forgotten the clear command of the Great Commission. You see, the Great Commission requires at least 2 points of obedience from church members. They are to go, and they are to depend totally upon the power of Christ. Next, the preference-driven church. A church cannot survive long-term where members are focused on their own preference. My music style, my desired length of order of worship services, my desired color and design of buildings and rooms, my activities and programs, my need of ministers and staff, my. And as I read this, I'm admitting complete fault for these as well. This is not like a directing. This is a self-reflection. Pastoral tenure decreases. The church will call in a new pastor with hope that the pastor would lead the church back to health. Pastor comes to the church and leads in a few changes, but members don't like the changes and resist. The pastor becomes discouraged and leaves, and in some cases, the pastor is fired. Repeat cycle. The church rarely prayed together. It was at that point that I asked the question, do you really think that was meaningful time of prayer? Do you think that it's how the New Testament churches prayed? And inevitably, there would be a pause and then an admission. No, they would say. It was more like a routine or a ritual. It would hardly qualify as corporate prayer in the New Testament sense. And then they would reflect, and their eyes would open, and they would remember those days when church members came together for powerful times of prayer. Some recall 24-hour prayer emphases on the church had. Those good old days of prayer typically coincided with the best days of the churches, at least to the best of their recollection. Not coincidentally, prayer and the health of the church went hand in hand. And when the church is engaged in meaningful prayer, it becomes both the cause and the result of greater church health. 2 more. The church had no clear purpose. But the dying churches at some point in their history forgot their purpose. Rarely could anyone point to a singular event or historical moment where the purpose was forgotten. It was a deadly and slow process. Attitudes shifted from gospel-centered and other-centered to self-centered. An outward focus became an inward obsession. Routines and traditions and rituals replaced the original purpose of being a gospel-driven people. As the church lost her purpose, she slowly and surely began to die, and the process was typically lengthy, but death did come. A church without a gospel-centered purpose is no church at all. And last, the church obsessed over the facilities. One church split would eventually die when the old pulpit was replaced with a new one. A pulpit. Think about that. The church actually had a business meeting and a major battle to vote on the new pulpit. Members who had not been in church for years showed up for the vote. Indeed, so-called inactive members often became active for a contested business meeting in the dying churches. Their presence ended abruptly once the vote was over. The new pulpit group defeated the old pulpit group in a close vote, and the old pulpit group took the pulpit and started a new church. By the way, the new church died only 2 years after it started, and the older church held on for another 11 years before its demise. It didn't end well. It really became apparent to us that we needed to reassess and refocus. So what do you do when death is at the door? I need to walk. Well, you take drastic measures to resuscitate. I won't walk, I'm sorry.
No, walk.
Okay. Walk. Take drastic measures to resuscitate. To restore breath, restart the heart, right? When a person's airways close and everything swells up, and they can't get the tube in, right? They make a small incision here. They bypass it. Because if they don't get oxygen to that patient within minutes, the organs will begin to die. God is our breath of life. And yes, slicing into this very delicate piece of flesh is brutal. But without that aggressive approach, the patient would die. We need him, or we die. Without his presence, without his direction, without his vision, and without his life, we die. End of story. He is the very heartbeat in all we do. If a patient's heart stops on the table, a surgeon will literally reach into their chest and massage the heart to get it to beat again. Think about that. We need to let him reach deep within us. We need to posture ourselves in a way that is expecting him, desperate for him, and sure of him. Because if we don't, we'll die. If we have no vision, no direction, and no passion, then death is imminent. It's not a question. John 15:2. I am of the real vine, and my Father is the farmer. He cuts off every branch of me that doesn't bear grapes, and every branch that is grape-bearing, he prunes back, so it will bear even more. You are already pruned back by the message that I have spoken. That was Jesus. Are we of the vine? Are we connected to him? Do we belong? See, a lack of belonging will produce a lack of responsibility and accountability. Not belonging means we're on the outside looking in. I'm an illegitimate child, okay? I fill the definition of a bastard child, no question. On my birth certificate, it has the word unknown where a father's name should be. And for a very long time, I struggled with unloved, unwanted, and feeling uncared for the majority of my childhood and my teens. My mother remarried, well, she married, had other children, and they were always my brothers and sisters, but there was still something that I knew was separate. I did not belong. My place, my roots were unknown. I was unknown. I had such a bitter taste with the word parents. It took years into my adulthood for me to even be able to say the word without a shudder. Because to me it was bitter. I didn't have parents, I had a mom. But I have a Father in heaven, as you do, and he is not unknown. Our Father has placed his seal upon our hearts. We belong to him. We belong to this family. We belong to his vision for us, the church and all of creation. We belong to that. We belong to the Great Commission. We belong to the lost. We belong to the saved. We belong to the addicts and the sick and the dying. Our future, our purpose is not unknown. We are not on the outside looking in. He gave us a vision. And like in Proverbs, like what I read before, let's open our eyes to see it so we do not stumble on ourselves. Let's attend to what he has revealed so that we can be most blessed. Okay? We have a choice. Chris and I purpose to stay here and build with you guys because this is where we belong. This is our home. This is our family. We live in a country where there is a church everywhere you go. But this is our home. And I really believe that it's your home too. Okay? So, that concludes my message. But now, how am I doing on time?
You're at 24 minutes.
Darn it! It's so hard! It's so hard! Okay, all right. So here's what we're going to do next, and maybe we can't get it done today, and that's okay. I want us all to come up and get in a circle if we can fit, which is a good problem to have. I have a copy of the 2018 vision that the elders put together with Dave. I cleaned it up. I took all of our thoughts out of it. Me, Larry, and Chris met on Tuesday, and we wanted to keep bringing it to you like a blank slate. Because this vision, if it's going to be our vision and you're going to belong to it too, you need to be part of building it. So we want to take the next whatever time we have and talk about that. And anyone who is new here or not a member, your thoughts are just as important as our thoughts. Or who's the oldest? Who's been here the longest? The Roths? You've been here the longest? Probably. Your opinions and your perspective
Don't
and
matter.
your wisdom is just as important as the rocks. Because the people that just walked in our door, the people who've only been here a while, have a fresh vision that some of the people that have been here longer maybe can't see. So don't feel excluded in this, you know? So with that, I'm going to shut this down because I'll be loud enough. You'll be able to hear me around the circle. I want us to come up, get together. We can grab our chairs, and we're going to brainstorm this thing. Okay?
I move